Hello traveler and welcome to the CopperSpoon. Tonight for dinner we're having beef pot pies. I have a beef and potato pot pie or a French onion soup pot pie. Let me know which one you like and I hope you enjoy.
Hello my little spoonies. Today I'm going to be giving you the full recipe tutorial for these delicious pot pies. We have a beef and potato pot pie and we also have a French onion pot pie. They're both equally delicious and I hope you enjoy. To start off, we are going to get our chuck roast going. This is just a chuck roast that I bought from the store. I want to say it was about a 3-pounder, but anywhere between 3 to 5 pounds is going to work perfectly for this. I went ahead and drizzled it with a little bit of olive oil and seasoned it with salt, pepper, paprika, Italian seasonings, and a garlic and herb seasoning blend. You can use whatever garlic and herb seasoning blend you want. I have a really good one from the dollar store, or I also love using That's Amore by Shore Smoke. Once that's seasoned on one side, flip it around, do the exact same thing on the other, and make sure you season those edges too. I kind of rolled my chuck roast around in this leftover seasoning that had fallen off of it, and made sure the sides were all nice and evenly coated. I then went ahead and started prepping my vegetables before moving on to anything else, just so that when we're ready to move over the stove, we have everything prepped and ready to go. I just quartered an onion and peeled it. I also peeled and chunked up some carrots. These don't have to be in any sort of small pieces. They're just big chunks. It's going to add flavor to the broth as it cooks. And then I also went ahead and peeled up a bunch of potatoes. You are also going to want a nice handful of peeled garlic before you move on to the next step, which is going to be searing our roast. I went ahead and added a little bit of olive oil to my cast iron pot. You can use whatever type of pot you want. I just made sure I did this in a big receptacle that would be able to braise everything in. And then over a medium-high heat, I went ahead and just seared my chuck roast on both sides. Once it was fully seared, I removed it from the pan, added in my carrots, onions, and garlic with a pat of butter as well as about a cup of red wine. Now you can replace this red wine with a combination of beef broth and Worcestershire sauce. You can deglaze your pan with just a little bit of water. Regardless of what you deglaze your pan with, we are just trying to get up all of the little crunchy burnt on bits from the bottom to help add flavor to our base. Another tip that you can use for replacing the alcohol in this is brewing a nice strong cup of black tea and using that instead. I also went ahead and seasoned the base at this step with some salt, pepper, and I also added in a couple of bay leaves. Once that liquid was reduced, I added back in my chuck roast about 4 cups of beef broth just until the roast was just barely covered, and then I gently placed my potatoes on the top because I wanted to be able to save those later without them becoming super mushy. I put a lid on that and let that simmer on a medium-low heat for about 3 to 4 hours until everything is nice, tender, and your chuck roast is falling apart. While that was cooking, I went ahead and got my onions ready for the French onion version of this pot pie. I just took 3 medium onions, I peeled them and I sliced them up as thinly as I could. It doesn't have to be super even here, but you do want just nice slices for these onions. Then I went ahead and took them over to the stovetop with a big old chunk of butter as well as a little bit of olive oil, and I caramelized those onions. This takes about an hour if you're doing it right, but you just want to cook those on a medium to low heat, stirring constantly. If it ever looks like your onions are burning, don't be afraid to deglaze your pan with either a little bit of white wine if you want that classic French onion flavor, or you can also just do a little bit of water. That's how I got these evenly golden. I just kept stirring them on a medium heat, adding water when I needed it. Now that our caramelized onions are done and our roast is nice and tender, we are ready to begin the assembly process. I went ahead and separated out the potatoes from my chuck roast, and then I also put the chuck roast into a separate bowl, and I just chunked all of those up. The chuck roast was very easily shredded, and the potatoes were super soft and tender, and I just kept those in nice big chunks. For the actual gravy that's going to go into our pot pie, I went ahead and took the broth that the roast braised in. I removed all of the extra flavors, the carrots, the onions, and the garlic pieces, and I went ahead and added in a cornstarch slurry. Now, cornstarch slurry is equal parts water and cornstarch. I added about 3 tablespoons of each, made sure that was mixed up really well, and then mixed that into the broth, heating it up until a nice, thick, glossy gravy is formed. Here I'm slicing up some Gruyere to go in our pot pies. Gruyere is the cheese used traditionally in French onion soup, so I thought this would be a really nice addition. I do recommend doing it a little bit differently than I did though. I would shred the Gruyere next time if I did this again instead of slicing it. I think it would help it melt more evenly, and I also wouldn't put it at the bottom of the cast iron. I would put it on top of the filling before the pie crust went on. The cheese just didn't melt very well, and it got kind of hard at the bottom of the pan, so I would switch this up if I did it again. Now we are fully ready to assemble our pot pies. For the French onion pot pie, I went ahead and added in a layer of onions, some of that beautifully roasted chuck roast, and then another layer of onions. For the beef and potato pot pie, I did a hearty layer of potatoes and topped off the rest with the chuck roast. Then I went ahead and just ladled over that beautiful gravy until my cast irons were filled to the very top. I might have honestly overfilled these with the gravy just a little bit, but I like it when my pot pies are nice and juicy, so I went ahead and added in as much as possible. This is a homemade pie dough. It has about 1 cup of butter, 3 cups of flour. It has freshly cracked black pepper and thyme and nice cold water. And I just incorporated it until it became a thick, flaky dough that would hold together if you formed it into a ball, but also not be super duper wet. I went ahead and put this in the freezer and let it cool while I was assembling my pies. You want your dough nice and cold when you're working with it. It's going to make it a lot easier. I used about half of the pie dough for each of these pot pies, rolled it out, and then just placed it over the pot pie. I highly recommend, if you're going to carve a cute little face in it, to do it on the cutting board first before adding it to your pot pie. I tried it the other way around and it did not go as well as I wanted it to. So roll your pie dough out until it's about 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little thinner depending on how much you like the dough. Make sure it's much bigger than the surface of your cast iron, and then carve your little face into it before you add it onto your pot pie. When we're putting it in the oven, we're going to bake it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 to 50 minutes, depending on how big your pot pie is. You want it to become nice and golden brown around the sides, and I forgot to film it, but you want to brush it with a little bit of vegetable oil before you put it in the oven. That's just going to help it brown up and become nice and crispy. You want your pie dough filling, the gravy, to be nice and bubbly by the time you take it out. So if your filling isn't bubbling, your pie's not quite ready yet. Also, make sure that you place a baking sheet underneath your pies when you bake them, because they will overflow a little bit. As soon as your pot pies come out of the oven, you're going to brush it with a little bit of garlic butter, and then you're ready to serve and enjoy.